We also have TikTok falling into the middle of this. I want to unpack TikTok just for a moment. It's owned by a company that is a Chinese company. In my experience, any system, any data that can be hacked will be hacked. All data, all information eventually gets hacked. Any information controlled by a Chinese or any other authoritarian country has the keys to the kingdom. In my mind, there is zero chance that the CCP does not have complete access or, whatever level of access they want to that data, because all the companies in China are required to give that level of access already. So why wouldn't one operating in the United States also have that level of access? What do you think about my assessment of the situation as somebody who's not on the ground in China, but is involved in technology and, used to manage servers for a living when I was in the IT world?
I think it's an accurate assessment. I think TikTok is precedent setting, and it's really important we get it right. The way I see it, there are three main issues in this case that need to be unpacked. The first is whether the president has the authority to force a divestment or suspend transactions with an entity on grounds of national security. The second is whether or not the president followed an adequate process for deliberating and implementing the action. And the third is whether or not the outcome is the right outcome or is at least justified. On the first, the presidents have fairly commonly put sanctions on entities like banks in the past. I suspect this case feels different to some people in the public because TikTok is a consumer mobile application. But based on my understanding of the authorities granted by the Defense Production Act of 1950, the Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act of 2018, and the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, I do believe that the president has the authority to take both types of actions. With that said, unlike in China, we have a system that's based on duly passed laws and checks and balances. And in our system, TikTok has the ability to sue the actions that the White House has taken if it believes that they are unlawful in part or in whole. Congress can choose to amend the law if it believes that the law should be clarified in some way, though once the case is thoroughly litigated, the question is whether a majority of 2/3 of the Senate will conclude that the law was applied in an unintended way. And I think, like you, I actually think most members of Congress will simply view this as the law working as intended, and that future presidents, regardless of what party, should have the authority to take similar actions against applications that pose similar national cybersecurity risks.
And when you look at the public's naivete to this, they think it's just a dance app. But it's part of the problem that people are so unsophisticated when they think about their smartphone that they don't also realize that it has a microphone, camera, GPS, and your photo albums, and can be rooted, and your MAC address can be hacked, as apparently TikTok has been doing. And that even if the data, this was the stupidest thing I ever saw, was the New York Times, I believe, saying like, well, the data is stored in the United States. It's like, well, hey, dummy, there's a thing called downloading. You download the data anytime you want and back it up. So you have this incredibly naive group of journalists or content producers in the world. And then you have the public. I'm not saying all journalists are, but a large number of them are when it comes to technology issues like this. And then the public it's wrapped in a silly dance moves. But we had specifically, I believe it was ISIS or Al Qaeda or some derivative group that was actually tracking our soldiers and high target soldiers like SEALs and Green Berets in the United States and overseas because of their smartphones. And that became a very critical issue of, hey, like you guys can't be on social media. And we had to come up with policies for that because they were looking to assassinate our high value generals and special forces. So this is not some abstraction. This is just completely naivete on the part of both journalists and the public. Yeah.
As you point out, TikTok seems benign because it is a video-based dance app. If you look at the details of the software, it's actually an incredibly sophisticated data collection software that collects people's GPS data every 30 seconds. It pings your clipboard and collects what people are copying and pasting on their cell phones on and off the app. in an ongoing way, that might mean that TikTok might have the passwords to almost all your accounts, including your email.
Wow. So if somebody goes to their whatever password manager and does the copy and then pastes it, and they have access to the clipboard, boom, now they've compromised some child's account whose parents might be a president or a governor or the CEO. They could also get compromising photos or video. This is not an abstract concept here. This is how this is how the United States, the Mossad, the KGB, this is how everybody's done it forever, except they used wiretaps and they used cameras and agents, and now we basically have an app to do it.
They could, and let's remember that a few years ago, they hacked the Office of Personnel Management, so they have a list of all the government employees that have security clearance. So if they wanted to know who to target in order to get compromising information, they actually have the list of that as of the early 2010s.
Wow. And so this is we're sitting here having this conversation. It seems so obvious to us. How much of this not being clear to our politicians has to do with the fact that we have such a polarized political space here?
One of the most surprising things in the current debate about TikTok is there is the fact that the current debate seems to not factor in the full aperture of the reasons why I think the current status quo with TikTok doesn't make sense on the one hand. And on the other hand, there is this bizarre argument that is being peddled that taking action against TikTok is somehow replicating China's behavior. On the first point, I would just say that there are, as I see it, three reasons why the US taking action against TikTok makes sense for the United States. The first is that, as I mentioned earlier, China has taken action against almost every single American content platform. And given that China's internet censorship discriminates against foreign companies, blocks the legitimate flow of services, and doesn't offer a channel to appeal, there is a credible argument to be made that their firewall violates several WTO rules that China itself agreed to when it joined the WTO back in 2001. So after years of diplomatic patience, I don't think most Americans would find it unreasonable for the US government to demand and enforce a basic principle of trade reciprocity. That's not arbitrary. On the contrary, it would be consistent with the spirit of WTO rules and the rules-based order that the United States has worked so hard to build over the last 70 years.
Yeah, that seems to me like a no-brainer. If you want to have TikTok here, that's totally fine. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, we're all coming to China. The chances of that happening are exactly zero, right? Xi Jinping would never allow any of those platforms in, correct?
It would never happen.
If we asked for reciprocity, it would not happen. It's just not a possibility.